Hello everyone, my name is Jasjit Singh. I am a professor at INSEAD and it's a real pleasure to share my thoughts today with all of you. Thank you for the invitation and for being here. So what I'll be talking about briefly today is the topic of growing a business with impact. Now, all of us are well aware that increasingly the conversations that used to be two different conversations, which is the conversation of impact on the one side and of business on the other side, are becoming conversations that are a part of a larger conversation, which is how can we have impact while running business at the same time. And indeed, a lot of people are saying that business is potentially a great force for good. It's a tool that can be used not just for making money, but for having a positive impact. And what I'm going to briefly talk about is what does it even mean to have an impact? And in particular, as you grow your business from the point of view of financial sustainability, how can you also keep an eye on having the impact that you really are seeking through your business, whether it's a social enterprise, whether it's an impact business, whether it's a sustainable business. The question worth asking is, how do I really make a difference? Now, just looking in terms of very fundamental definition of impact, in my mind, the definition of impact is quite straightforward. It is imagining a world where you are there and contributing, and imagining then a world where you weren't there. And that delta, that difference, is really your impact. So it's quite a simple definition if you really cut through the chase of all the bells and whistles that very often go into conversations about impact. But what does this really mean? And to really get into the hood on the question of what is impact, I find it useful to follow the 5 questions that you might have seen before in the context of the Impact Management Project, which is a project which brings together thinking from people that are on, leaders in the impact space and asking them, what is it that really goes into realizing high impact? And the essence of impact is these 5 questions. The first question is the what. What are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve in the first place? Because if you don't really have a goal, then it's very hard to even know if you're being successful or not on the dimension of impact. The second question is who, which is asking not just what outcomes are you realizing, but exactly who are the stakeholders that you will have really razor sharp focus on as you try to achieve those outcomes. The third question is how much. What that means is, what is your aspiration, both in terms of number of people you intend to reach and the lives that you intend to change? And very often conversations about impact get simplified in terms of, hey, we are reaching 1 million people. But the question that you want to ask is not just whether you're reaching 1 million or 10,000 or 1,000, but do you really materially affect their lives? Because if you change lives of just 100 people substantially, I would argue that your impact is a lot more than perhaps you're reaching 1 million people, but you really don't make much difference in the lives of these people that you're barely touching through your work. The fourth question is a question that gets really into the rigor of impact, which is saying, what is your unique contribution? You could be looking at the outcomes, and it might look like the outcomes are going up, but it could be that the outcomes are improving simply as the economy is improving, because other organizations are also trying to help the same people, and so on. So what really is your unique contribution? And you can ask that question as an enterprise, or you could ask that question as an investor, in which case you would have this additional layer that not only is the enterprise that you're investing in having a valuable contribution, but you are a key enabler helping that enterprise achieve those goals. And the last question that we should always keep an eye on are the risks. You might have the greatest theory of how you're going to bring about a certain change, but maybe there are big risks coming in the way of achieving it. And also, very importantly, you have to keep track of the unintended consequences that your intentions might have. So I'm going to just take 5 quick examples to illustrate these points. The first is the point about what outcomes. And take the example of Tom Shoes, which is now called simply Tom's. And at its peak, it was a super successful impact business. At the point that they got one of their investors, it was valued at about 700 or 800 million dollars. And their basic idea is, well, we'll sell a pair of shoes to somebody in the developed world, and for every pair of shoes that we sell, we'll give a pair of shoes for free in a poor country, maybe to people that don't have shoes, right? So in their mind, the outcome is simply that the people have shoes. And one of the things they've been criticized for is, well, that's not an outcome in itself, and maybe you haven't even researched enough on whether this is outcome that people there care about. Are you sure it's going to materially affect lives in a way that you've been claiming? Because Tom's in its early advertisements was claiming that this helps children's school attendance go up, it helps people fall sick less often, and so on. And they were criticized for not having enough evidence of that. And also whether these outcomes really matter to the people you're trying to serve in the first place. Which brings us to the second question, which is, who are your target stakeholders, right? Just being very clear on what populations are you serving. So if your shoes are going to get to people that already have shoes, even if they're locally made cheap shoes, your impact might be less than if your shoes really are reaching people who generally do not have shoes and for whom shoes would make a difference. Similarly, in this picture, in the context of microfinance, if you are giving small loans to, let's say, women, you have to be very clear. Are these women, are the loans being given to encourage entrepreneurship? In which case, the question to ask is, are these women really underserved? Are these women really otherwise ready to be entrepreneurs, and the only thing they need is the loans? Do they have a desire and appetite and social conditions to be entrepreneurs? Do they really not have access to finance? Because what happens in microfinance very often is you're the 5th or the 6th or the 7th microfinance organization in an area where there's already a lot of debt. So your loans could have a negative rather than positive effects. So being very clear on what are the outcomes and who are you trying to serve in terms of improving these outcomes through whatever is your intervention. Which brings us to the third goal, which is, what is your ambition in terms of the scale of your impact, but also in terms of the depth of your impact. And an example here is a social impact bond that happened in the context of US, where Goldman Sachs claimed that they had achieved success by reaching learning goals for 109 out of 110 students. And what they got criticized for is, well, yeah, but we are not clear about the depth of your impact. How much difference are you making? And in particular, what's your unique contribution? And an example of organization that focuses a lot on not just the impact being achieved in general, but their unique contribution is One Acre Fund, which says, okay, we are going to serve smallholder farmers in Eastern Africa, and we are going to say not just how much are their lives improving, but we are going to go further and actually check how much are their lives improving because of us, rather than them perhaps being improved in any way because of other economic conditions and so on, right? So that requires careful measurement of what would have happened in their lives even if you weren't there. And the last point is the risk of unintended consequences. So consider this whole movement around fair trade. On the one hand, it promises to give above market rates, fair prices to farmers, let's say we're growing coffee or cocoa. But on the other hand, there's always a risk of unintended consequences that you might end up taking the business away from the smaller farmers, the poorer farmers who don't know how to tap into the fair trade network, they are not certified, and so on. So while you might be helping certain farmers, you might actually be hurting other farmers. So the key question becomes, how do you achieve that balance between really doing good for your target and also at the same time being careful not to have unintended consequences? So these really are the 5 questions. The what outcomes, who are your stakeholders, how much is the scale of impact that you expect, what is your unique contribution, and are you really taking care of the risks? And the last thing I would say is, of course, business is a great tool for having impact, but there are different ways of having impact, all the way from a pure business that relies on market forces to charities which are not relying on business at all. And in between are social enterprises which put impact first, sustainable business which would put profits first, but still try to run a good business. And in between is this impact business, which is saying, okay, we really think there is money to be made here without compromises while having an impact. So it really is a spectrum, and in your forming your impact strategy based on your target population, as well as the outcomes, you might find one of them is a better vehicle than the other. So it really has to be a good match between that. So I hope you find that helpful, and much more detail about a lot of these brief ideas is available on my website, which I mentioned right at the beginning. It's been a pleasure, and please enjoy the remaining sessions in the conference. Thank you.